She gave me 72 hours to demolish my own house. Not a single knock on the door, no hearing, no opportunity to ask questions, just a deadline accompanied by a smile that suggested she had already won. However, the moment she tried to bar me from entering my own cabin, she awakened a force no regulation could contain. This is likely not the first occasion when someone mistook their HOA authority for a throne. Share your experience below if this sounds all too familiar. My name is David Miller, 58 years old, and after dedicating 35 years as a county land inspector in California, I believed I had earned some tranquility. I inherited my father's cabin by Pine Lake, part of a 50-acre property he purchased in 1985, with the vision of creating a calm and respectful neighborhood. For a time it was just that, peaceful and neighborly, until Margaret Thompson arrived 3 years ago. At 52, she swiftly seized control as HOA president and transformed the community into her own domain. She imposed ridiculous regulations: no laundry lines, no planting flowers without permission, and even house paint colors required approval. Most residents kept quiet to avoid conflict, but having spent my career handling people like her, Margaret underestimated me. I was familiar with every law, every loophole, and every property boundary, and she had chosen the wrong person to intimidate. The whole ordeal began when I planted a single sunflower in front of my porch. It was nothing extraordinary, just a seed tossed into the soil because I liked the idea of something bright and uplifting welcoming me each day. Margaret showed up the very next morning armed with her clipboard, and that, with a patronizing smile, Margaret explained that I needed approval from the HOA before making any changes to the landscaping. I politely declined, telling her it was my land and I would plant whatever I wished. That was when I noticed her expression change from false friendliness to something far more sinister. What Margaret did not know was that back in 1985, my father had bought the entire 50 acres surrounding Pine Lake. He had leased 45 acres to the HOA for the symbolic price of $1 per year, hoping to create an affordable community where families could prosper. I inherited that land and never saw the need to raise the rent, believing that decent neighbors would manage themselves fairly. After I refused to seek permission for my sunflowers, Margaret embarked on what I can only call a relentless campaign of harassment. It began with minor issues, but quickly intensified. One Monday morning, I found a fine of $200 for parking my old pickup truck improperly. The truck had been parked in the same spot on my property for 3 years, yet according to Margaret's interpretation of the rules, it now spoiled the neighborhood's appearance. By Wednesday, I received a $300 penalty for unauthorized construction because of the wooden fishing chair I had built by the lake. Then that Friday brought a $150 fine for using an exterior paint color that did not comply with HOA standards. The cabin had remained natural wood since its construction, but it apparently was not part of Margaret's approved color scheme. Each citation was accompanied by threatening language about escalating enforcement measures and community standards. I began keeping detailed records. 35 years as a land inspector had taught me the importance of thorough documentation. I took photographs of every citation, recorded the dates and times of Margaret's visits, and started studying the legal documents that governed our HOA. Something about her aggressive tactics seemed off, and my professional instincts urged me to investigate further. Margaret's next step was more calculated and much more cruel. She arranged an emergency HOA meeting without inviting me, where she painted me as a troublemaker refusing to comply with basic neighborhood standards. Neighbors who had been friendly for years suddenly crossed the street to avoid me. Mrs. Garcia stopped greeting me from her garden. Tom Johnson, who used to invite me to weekend barbecues, no longer made eye contact. The whisper campaign was deliberate and effective. Margaret told people I was potentially dangerous, claimed I had anger management problems, and suggested that my presence was lowering property values. She portrayed herself as the courageous community leader, protecting everyone from the unstable old man living by the lake. The isolation hit immediately and deeply. These were not just neighbors. Some had become true friends over the years. But Margaret made one critical error. She underestimated my patience and professional experience while she was busy turning everyone against me. Facing opposition from the community, I quietly gathered proof by installing extra security cameras around my property and began recording every interaction. More importantly, I started digging into the HOA's financial records and examining the original land agreements my father had signed. The harassment intensified to alarming levels when Margaret decided to bring law enforcement into the situation. She contacted the police, accusing me of making threatening gestures during a discussion about her citation authority. The officers who responded acted professionally and conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing both of us and reviewing my security footage. The video clearly showed me calmly standing on my own property while politely asking questions about the legal grounds for her fines. Margaret's false police report ultimately backfired on her, though not before causing me considerable stress and embarrassment. Having police vehicles parked in your driveway tends to fuel neighborhood gossip, and Margaret made sure everyone was aware of the incident by posting on the neighborhood social media page about increasing safety concerns and the need for protective actions against residents who do not comply. What Margaret didn't realize was that the officers who came to the scene were familiar with frequent excessive HOA complaints. Officer Martinez pulled me aside and quietly urged me to keep detailed records of everything. He told me power can go to people's heads, and they forget there are limits. Laws concerning harassment and false reporting were being twisted. Margaret's campaign sank to a new low when she started targeting my property specifically. After a trip to the grocery store, I returned home to discover my mailbox had vanished and a temporary post was put up in its place, displaying a notice about mailbox violations for not conforming. The original mailbox had stood there for decades, yet Margaret insisted it failed to comply with the current Homeowners Association standards. She also caused the community landscaping team to mistakenly trim branches from the oak tree that shaded my porch, arguing that the branches were intruding on common areas. The tree was clearly within my property boundaries, but Margaret acted as if her HOA role granted her control over everything she could see. Every move she made seemed carefully planned to be barely legal enough to steer clear of criminal charges while being invasive enough to disrupt my life. The mental strain was overwhelming. I began to realize how relentless harassment could force people out of their homes, even when legally justified. Margaret was betting I would surrender and relocate instead of resisting. She had no clue that her actions were being recorded and chronicled by someone with many years of expertise in property law and public administration. The breaking point arrived on a Saturday morning when I came back from shopping to find my fence smashed and my sunflower cut down at the roots. Margaret had hired a landscaping crew to remove what she called non-compliant plants and structures while I was away. The sunflower that sparked this entire conflict was gone, and the wooden fence I had built around my small garden lay shattered. Attached to my front door was a final notice warning of serious HOA violations. It stated that I had 72 hours to voluntarily remove all non-conforming structures, or the HOA would enforce compliance by force. The security cameras had recorded everything, showing Margaret instructing 3 men to destroy my property, while saying, "This old man needs to learn his place." That evening, I sat in my cabin, staring at the pile of broken fence posts and the empty spot where my sunflower had once grown. For the first time in weeks, I smiled because Margaret had crossed the line from mere harassment to criminal destruction of property. More importantly, she had no idea what she had just set in motion. I went to the basement safe, where I had kept my father's legal papers for 4 decades. It was time for Margaret to find out exactly who she was dealing with. My first call was to James Morrison, the real estate lawyer who had helped my father arrange the original land agreement in 1985. At 72 years old, James was still sharp as a tack and practically rubbed his hands with delight when I explained the situation. "David, I've been waiting 40 years for this conversation," he laughed. "These HOA bullies need to learn the difference between true authority and imagined power." We spent 3 hours reviewing the original lease agreement, and James's smile grew broader with each page. The contract contained a clause permitting rent adjustments to reflect fair market value with 30 days' notice. For 4 decades, I had been charging the HOA just $1 per year for 45 acres of prime lakefront property. The current going rate for similar land in our region was about $10,000 per acre annually. The legal consequences were overwhelming. Not only could I raise their rent to $450,000 per year, but Margaret's property damage also gave me grounds for criminal charges and civil damages. James drafted the formal rent increase notice while I gathered evidence of Margaret's harassment campaign. My experience as a county land inspector was invaluable as I performed a detailed audit of the HOA's actions. What I uncovered was astonishing, even by Margaret's standards. She had been systematically breaching both the lease agreement and state HOA regulations for more than 2 years. The clubhouse and swimming pool were constructed on my land without the owner's approval, a direct violation of the lease terms. Margaret had increased HOA fees from $200 to $400 per month without following the correct voting procedures of the members. Most damaging, she had misappropriated $15,000 from the community fund to finance landscaping on her own property. I found falsified meeting minutes, forged signatures on official papers, and proof that Margaret had threatened residents with fines if they did not support her in HOA elections. The woman's actions were utterly scandalous. She was not merely a petty despot. She was running what could only be described as a criminal operation masquerading as community leadership. The most unexpected turn occurred when Robert Thompson, Margaret's husband, showed up at my doorstep at 8 o'clock in the evening. He appeared worn out and truly regretful as he requested a private conversation. "Mr. Miller, I cannot simply stand by and watch this continue," he admitted. "Margaret has changed into someone I fail to recognize. Power has made her ruthless." Robert confessed that Margaret's conduct at home had grown erratic and domineering. She spied on his calls, checked his phone, and exploded into anger whenever anyone challenged her decisions about the homeowners association. He handed me a USB drive containing Margaret's emails and messages exchanged with other board members, including proof of vote manipulation and financial wrongdoing. "This shows she falsified signatures to claim the HOA presidency," Robert said quietly as he gave me printed emails. "Here is a list of families she threatened with penalties if they refused to back her." The evidence was overwhelming and supplied the last crucial elements I needed to form a foolproof case against Margaret's rule of intimidation. James and I completed the legal paperwork that would bring her reign to a permanent halt. The official notice was straightforward yet crushing. Effective 30 days from this date, the annual lease fee for the Pine Lake community would be raised from $1 to $450,000, reflecting fair market value. We also drafted a civil lawsuit against Margaret personally for property damage, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The criminal complaint for property destruction was set to be filed with the Sheriff's Department. However, the most crucial document was the formal request for an emergency HOA meeting aimed at addressing urgent issues vital to the community's survival. Through my contacts among former colleagues, I connected with Sarah Kim, an investigative journalist from the local ABC affiliate who focused on stories involving HOA abuses. "This is precisely the kind of story our viewers need to know," she said with enthusiasm. "People are fed up with petty tyrants hiding behind homeowner association rules." Sarah's initial investigation uncovered that Margaret's conduct was not isolated. She had previously been forced to leave another neighborhood due to similar disputes with residents, and there were online complaints about her management style going back several years. This situation extended beyond my personal disagreement. It revealed a recurring pattern of mistreatment that warranted public scrutiny. The weekend gave me the chance to prepare for what I anticipated would be the most significant community meeting in Pine Lakes' history. Margaret had spent months casting herself as the guardian of community standards, but she was about to discover that genuine leadership does not come from intimidation or false titles. I sent official meeting notifications to every one of the 67 households in the neighborhood. I was exercising my right as a member of the Pine Lake community. According to the HOA bylaws, the subject of the meeting was straightforward: crucial information about land ownership and the community's future. Margaret called me within an hour, yelling about my unauthorized meeting. I calmly reminded her that any community member could request emergency sessions when important issues arose. By 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening, the community hall was bursting at the seams. 89 people squeezed into a space meant for 50, with neighbors from nearby areas drawn by whispers of conflict. Sarah, Kim, and her cameraman took their spots at the back, filming with Margaret's permission, which had been reluctantly given under public meeting laws. Margaret arrived carrying a thick folder full of documents, evidently expecting to dominate the discussion. She had no clue that her 40-year reign of ignorance was about to be shattered publicly in the most dramatic fashion. As everyone settled into their seats, the tension was almost tangible. Everyone sensed that something major was about to unfold, though no one quite knew what. I stood before the community that felt like my second family and asked a simple question: how many of you actually know who owns the land where the Pine Lake community stands? The confused whispers and blank looks told me everything I needed to understand. Margaret's face turned pale, but she still thought she could maintain control. I continued, "Margaret, since you care so much about property rights and community values, would you like to explain to everyone holding the deed to these 45 acres?" When Margaret stayed quiet, I took out the leather folder containing my father's original documents. "Let me introduce myself properly. I am David Miller, son of Robert Miller, who purchased this entire 50-acre plot in 1985. I am the landlord. You have been paying $1 per year to rent this land." The silence in that room was complete. You could hear a pin drop as 89 people slowly grasped the weight of my revelation. Margaret looked as if she had been struck by lightning, while murmurs of disbelief and confusion spread through the crowd. I connected my laptop to the room's projector and started methodically presenting proof of Margaret's wrongdoings. The security footage showed her instructing the destruction of my fence and sunflowers in sharp detail, with her voice clearly heard telling the workers to teach this old man a lesson. The financial records were even more devastating. Spreadsheets revealed Margaret's unauthorized fee hikes, invoices totaling $15,000 for personal landscaping paid from community funds, and forged meeting minutes where she had literally signed other people's names to approve her plans. Each new piece of evidence caused gasps of anger and betrayal from community members who realized their trust had been broken live before their eyes. But the worst violations I revealed were these threatening emails Margaret sent to families who questioned her authority. Robert's evidence had filled the room with undeniable truth. Message after message appeared on the screen. Margaret had threatened residents with fines, legal action, and even eviction if they dared to challenge her decisions. Mrs. Garcia, the elderly woman who had stopped waving at me, stood up, tears welling in her eyes. She said, "Mr. Miller, I owe you an apology. Margaret told us you were dangerous, that you had threatened violence. I was afraid to speak to you." Her voice trembled as she explained how Margaret had isolated her from the community simply for asking questions about the budget. Next was Tom Johnson, my former barbecue companion. He shared how Margaret fined him $800 for letting his children play on the grass after 6 o'clock in the evening, claiming it was damaging community property. His family had to reduce their grocery spending to pay off those penalties. One story after another came to light, revealing financial intimidation, social manipulation, and blatant bullying disguised as community management. Lisa Park, a single mother of 2, gave perhaps the most heart-wrenching testimony. Margaret threatened to have her children removed from the community playground if she did not vote for her in the last election. She said, "Troublemaking families were not welcome in Pine Lake." The room buzzed with angry whispers as everyone grasped the full scope of Margaret's abuse of power. At last, Margaret raised her voice, shouting above the crowd. She said, "You are all being deceived. I have worked tirelessly to make this community better. Every rule I have put in place was for your benefit." Her face flushed with anger as she pointed accusingly at the audience. In the room, this elderly man was attempting to dismantle everything we had created together. "What exactly have we built, Margaret?" I asked with calmness. "A community where neighbors fear planting flowers, where children cannot play outside after 6 in the evening, where families suffer hunger because of your arbitrary fines." The stark contrast between her shouting and my composed questions made her seem even more unstable. "You have no right to embarrass me in front of everyone," Margaret screamed, her carefully constructed mask completely crumbling. "I am the president of this HOA," she declared. The irony was undeniable. In her moment of greatest asserted power, she looked utterly powerless. Sarah Kim, the reporter, sought permission to speak to the community as an impartial observer. "I have covered numerous HOA conflicts across the state. What I saw here tonight is one of the clearest examples of power abuse I have ever recorded. Mr. Miller has the legal authority to end this lease agreement completely." The room grew quiet as people realized the gravity of the situation. Their entire community could be dissolved overnight if I chose to use my property rights. But I had a different intention. "I have no plans to force families out of their homes," I declared. "However, we need new leadership that truly serves the community instead of exploiting it." The vote to remove Margaret from all HOA roles was overwhelmingly decisive. 64 residents voted for her removal, with only 2 against and 1 abstention. The sense of relief was palpable. The room grew quiet as everyone realized their nightmare was finally over. Margaret sat in shocked silence as the community she had tormented for 3 years formally withdrew her authority. She collected her papers and left the meeting without a word, met only by the uneasy stares of those she had intimidated for years. Robert stayed behind, apologizing to individual families and pledging to fully assist in recovering the community's misappropriated funds. He appeared genuinely relieved to be free from his wife's corrosive control. Mrs. Garcia was unanimously chosen as the temporary HOA president, bringing 3 decades of experience as an elementary school principal to the position. Her first official act was to offer a formal apology to me on behalf of the community and to ask for my help in creating fair and transparent governance policies. That very evening, local news coverage began with Sarah Kim's initial report, sparking hundreds of supportive comments from viewers who had endured similar harassment by HOAs. Our story was turning into a powerful example of victorious resistance against small-minded oppression, encouraging others to defend their rights. Mrs. Garcia demonstrated everything Margaret lacked. She was cooperative, transparent, and genuinely committed to serving the community instead of dominating it. Her first official meeting attracted 53 attendees, a stark contrast to Margaret's usual gatherings of 8 to 10 people. The new board included Tom Johnson as treasurer and Lisa Park as secretary Dr. Martinez was appointed as the legal advisor, and, surprisingly, Robert Thompson, eager to make amends for his wife's actions, also stepped forward. The first priority was financial transparency. The HOA fees were immediately cut from $400 to $250 monthly, with detailed budgets shared with every household. Any expense exceeding $500 required community approval, and monthly financial statements were sent to all residents. Property rules were completely revamped. The absurd restrictions Margaret had set were removed, leaving only essential safety and sanitation standards. Residents could now plant flowers without obtaining permits, hang laundry outdoors, and allow their children to play until 8 in the evening instead of 6. The shift in the community's mood was swift and remarkable. Margaret and Robert's divorce proceeded rapidly, with Robert gaining custody of their 2 teenage children who had been ashamed by their mother's public conduct. Margaret was compelled to sell the house to repay the $15,000 she had stolen from community funds, plus $5,000 in damages for destroying my property. Criminal charges for property damage resulted in a $2,000 fine and 100 hours of community service, which Margaret completed at a homeless shelter under court supervision. Additionally, she was required to take anger management classes and was permanently prohibited from serving on any HOA board in the state. The most rewarding outcome of all. Margaret's decision to leave was completely her own, as she could no longer endure the daily reminders of her public shame. She relocated to Florida to live with her sister. Meanwhile, Robert stayed in Pine Lake with the children, gradually earning respect in the community by working hard to mend the harm caused by his former wife, Sarah. Kim's follow-up article, titled "The Landlord Who Fought Back," went viral, amassing over 2 million views across multiple platforms. The story struck a chord with viewers nationwide who had endured similar harassment from homeowners associations. What began as a local dispute evolved into a powerful example of standing up against bureaucratic oppression. I received countless emails from people sharing their own HOA nightmares and seeking guidance. Several lawyers reached out, interested in using our case as a benchmark in comparable conflicts. The overwhelming attention was ultimately a force for good, shining a light on the urgent need for HOA reform nationwide. Our story played a key role in California's enactment of what became known as the Pine Lake Amendment. This law requires all HOAs to keep transparent financial records, establish clear appeals processes for violations, and undergo state supervision when complaints of abuse pass specific limits. What started as a neighborhood conflict sparked policy changes across the state, safeguarding homeowners from future despots like Margaret. Pine Lake transformed from a place marked by fear and petty rules into one of the most sought-after communities in the region. County property values did not rise by 15% because of strict regulations, but because people truly desired to live in a community where neighbors showed respect and kindness toward one another. The waiting list to purchase homes in our neighborhood extended 3 months long, with potential buyers specifically mentioning our cooperative governance style and strong community spirit. We demonstrated that neighborhoods flourish through teamwork and mutual respect rather than intimidation and excessive control. Mrs. Garcia and I joined forces to provide consulting services to other communities facing HOA conflicts. Our success story brought hope to residents nationwide who felt trapped by petty dictators within their own neighborhoods. Tom Johnson and I launched a monthly workshop to teach practical skills to local children, while Lisa Park was chosen for the City Council, introducing our collaborative approach into municipal governance. Today, exactly 2 years after my confrontation with Margaret, I sit in the same wooden chair she once tried to have destroyed, gazing over a community garden now shared by 15 families growing sunflowers together. We planted them to honor what we call Sunflower Day, marking the anniversary of our community's renewal through standing up against oppression. A small wooden sign on my cabin door, carved by Robert as a token of friendship, reads, "David Miller, Community Friend." However, the title I hold dearest is not written on any sign, but heard in the laughter and play of children nearby. The grass stretches until 8 in the evening, accompanied by the sight of neighbors exchanging stories over garden fences and the understanding that we created something better from the remnants of Margaret's oppressive rule. My father purchased this land 4 decades ago with a vision of building a tranquil community. It took 40 years, a power-hungry dictator, and one old man's refusal to succumb to intimidation. But that vision finally became real. Sometimes defending peace means fighting for it, and the greatest triumph is not in defeating your opponent, but in creating something beautiful from what they attempted to ruin. Margaret tried to paint me as the enemy of this neighborhood. In the end, she helped me become its closest ally. The sunflowers in our community garden now grow 8 feet tall, turning their faces to the light, just as our neighborhood learned to turn from darkness toward hope. The true lesson goes beyond defeating petty tyrants, though that is certainly gratifying. It reminds us that genuine power does not arise from fear or false authority. It springs from service, respect, and the bravery to stand up for what is right, even when you stand alone. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually the strongest,